Hi, everyone. If you're like me, you have found mobile phones in the classroom to be both a blessing and a curse. There are times when I want my students to have access to the outside world, but there are other times when I just want my students fully engaged in the classroom without distracting technology. This is where our sponsor Flipped comes in. Flipped is a first ever classroom engagement application that keeps students from getting distracted by their mobile phones when they're learning, and it does it in a really clever way. Some instructors have even reported that Flipped has been associated with increased grades and reduction in attrition. If you are interested in learning more about Flipped, please visit flippedapp.co/psych. That's FLIPPDAPP.co/psych. Welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld, along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. This is a special edition of the Psych Sessions podcast, IntroPsychSessions, conversations about teaching introductory psychology, where we showcase some of the best teachers from across the nation, from high school, 2-year, and 4-year institutions. We hope that you'll find this helpful as you go to prepare your own intro psych class for the upcoming year, as we talk about assessment, course design, and pretty much everything else. So let's get right into it. Please enjoy Intro Psych Sessions. I am here with Regan Gurung from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Welcome to this special Intro Psych chat, and it's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Garth.
I prepped you already about what we're doing here, and so I just have a bunch of questions for you, and the idea is we want to display what a number of really great intro psych teachers from all over the country are doing with their intro psych class. So the first place we start is, can you give us a picture of where you teach, class size, who are your students, just so that when we get into the rest of the questions, we know where you're working from?
Sure. So the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, currently 6,300 students, almost 400 psych majors, and currently intro psych is taught to at a class size of 250. I say currently, we've had it at 150 before, but for the last 10 plus years, I think we've had it at 250. The students are, I would say, actually not I would say, I know the actual stats are about 86% white and the 14% Latino, Hmong American, African American, and things like that, but definitely predominantly white. Also predominantly from Northeast Wisconsin. We do have, over the last few years, we've actually been getting people coming in from Chicago and, other places like that. But for the most part, it's Northeast Wisconsin.
And why is that? Why are those students coming to University of Wisconsin Green Bay? Is it just convenient?
The students in the area, you mean? Yeah, I think our psych department has a pretty good reputation. I think when people think, where shall I do psychology in the system, we definitely are one of those places that people think about because of reputation of the department. And I think I've seen that more recently. I have a lot of conversations with students and I say, hey, what brought you to Green Bay? And they go, well, I wanted to do psych. And so I heard good things about here.
Good. So in your intro psych class, do you think that more than like there are students who are coming in with psychology as a degree in mind more than maybe the general stat?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I think our intro classes, the big change recently is that more and more high school students are taking AP Psych, are taking college credit in high school type of courses. So, and that's why I would say no to intro psych. Yes to the Green Bay program, but not necessarily to the intro psych class.
Got it.
Because a lot of them have taken AP or college credit.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So you miss those students?
Absolutely.
Probably the ones who are really high achieving who get that credit through AP.
But the good news is I then see them in research methods. So over the last few years, I've been switching to many more sections of research methods, which I'm loving. And it's really great because all those folks who are not taking intro psych at college are then taking research methods. I mean, this semester in my research methods class, I have 3 second semester first year students.
Wow.
And that almost never happens.
No.
Right? It's normally they're sophomores or juniors.
Oh, they're trying to get into the course. It's great.
Right,
They're looking
exactly.
forward to
and
it.
now here we are, second semester. Freshmen, second semester, they're in research methods.
Oh, that's great.
Because they've had intro, because they know they want psych, they know they want to get rolling.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 days ago, I got an email from a student who actually said, and mind you, this is a freshman, second semester student in my research methods class, and she said, tell me what I need to do to start preparing for the GRE. And, that was I was like, well, good news. You've got some time.
Yep,
But
yep.
I like the spirit. So
Good. Is there anything else that we missed that we should know about your intro psych class before we get into the nitty gritty?
So I think many of our students double major. Something very common is a psych major with a business minor, with a human development major, with a human development minor, with a human bio minor. So in intro psych, there's still, the bulk of them are going to go on to do other things. Mm-hmm. But what I have noticed is, and one of the big reasons I'm a big champion for intro psych is a good experience in that class, and then you see them adding psych as a minor, even though they may not have thought about doing that before.
Yeah, great. So you already told us how big your classes are, 150 to 250 students. That changes things, right? So how
Absolutely.
does that? How do you approach teaching a class that size?
So,
and do you have teaching?
Right.
Yeah, you can tell us
yeah,
about
so
how you
so
grade.
The way I structure it, so there's a lot of design elements here, right? And I go in with the mindset that even though it's 250, my whole goal is to still make it a conversation between two people, right? So how does that happen? Well, the way it happens is I put a lot of work into memorizing names. And then I also have design elements in there where the students are broken down into small groups very often. So let me unpack a whole bunch of things, and I'll take it in order. So first off, there's, I think, starting off with what are those design elements that make a large class seem smaller. So I mentioned memorizing names. I also move a lot. So even it's 250 stadium seating, I walk all the way to the back, up, down, to the side. Sometimes I walk, if I can, through an aisle. So that proximity makes a big difference, because I know I can tell, I've seen this time and time again, is if I'm down in front or far away, I'm a lot less likely to get a hand thrown up from somebody in the back. If I happen to be standing right next to them and throw out a question, the hand goes up. So it's those simple things like that. So memorizing names, moving so there's actual proximity. And then I think there are structural elements such as group work. So even in this big class, every week, so my classes are Tuesday, Thursdays, every week, either Tuesday or Thursday, the class is going to break up into groups of 5 and do something. So they expect it. They know there's going to be some conversation, and this is where I use teaching assistants to work. So let's talk about teaching assistants for a second.
I'm going to pause you for a sec and just ask, with stadium seating, how do you get them into comfortable groups of 5? How does that work?
Right. So I use a number of different little fun things. So sometimes what I do is I have people so I'll have, let's say, row 1. In row 1, I have the first 3 people stand up, the next 3 stay seated, the next 3 stand up, the next 3 stay seated. In row 2, I have the first 2 stand up and the next 2 stay seated, and so on. And then the 5 people standing are a group, the 5 people sitting are a group, all the way down the line.
Okay, and then they're just turning around.
They're just turning around.
Well, and one of the reasons I'm interested in this is I've heard from some people who teach larger class sizes in stadium seating that they don't do small groups because it's too hard with stadium seating, but you've found a way to do it effectively.
It's hard. It's not impossible. Right? So, these exercises aren't going on for 15 minutes where they have to be twisted all over. I completely say, hey, sit up on the back of the chair. Stand up a little bit. Sit on the arms. Don't break the habituation of, this is a big class, I sit here for 80 minutes. No, stand up. Move your group down into the aisle.
Yep.
things like that.
Great.
And I think the moment you're open to doing stuff like that, the whole environment gets a lot more easier to deal with.
Good. So you were going to talk about teaching assistants.
Right. So what I do is for a class of 250, I always recruit at least 6 teaching assistants, right? Each of the 6 teaching assistants are given a group. I divide my entire class into groups of about 40. Okay, so each teaching assistant gets about 40 students, and I call them pods, and each TA gets their own pod. And starting from the end of week 1, these TAs start communicating with their pods. So they email them, they ask questions of their pods, and then at 4 points of the semester, 3 to 4 points of the semester, the TAs meet with just their pod of 40. So it's kind of the old school, in England they would call it recitation sessions. Here, it's, so instead of the once a meet with your TA, that's essentially what I do. But it's that same group of 40 that this individual TA has built a relationship with. So, I urge the pods to come down and meet their TAs before class or after class and things like that. Mm-hmm. I want to say a little bit more about the TA because in stark contrast to how I've heard TAs working in maybe some grad schools or larger schools, my TAs are very explicitly trained how to teach. So we meet as a group once a week. I touch base with them, literally with the 6 of them, briefly before each class in case I have special directions for staging for elements of that day. They read Teaching of Psychology or STLP articles. They read Mikichi's teaching tips. And we do Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So every time I teach Intro Psych, my TAs and I come up with a Scholarship of Teaching and Learning project that we then do on the class. So it is so much more of this, how do we teach, than just, crowd management.
Right. Do you feel like you have been teaching Intro Psych for so long that you have, I don't know, I know we don't ever feel like masters of content or something like that, but you've done it for so long that you can move on to these other, to the how you teach.
Absolutely.
Instead of, because I'm thinking about an early career person trying to do what you do and being so focused on teaching the content that they might lose out on the effectiveness of using groups, pods, or teaching assistants effectively, of collecting data in class.
Right. So I think there are 2 things here. That one of them is absolutely the more comfortable you are with content, the more bandwidth you have to focus on other things. I mean, I am often so conscious of multiple things going on at the same time. So I could be talking about a certain topic, but I know it so well that I can pay attention to facial expressions. I can pay attention to sudden movements that may suggest somebody's not paying attention. And there's a lot of metacognition going on with my teaching. I mean, for those 80 minutes, I don't have to think too much about what do I say next because it's there. And I can pay a lot more attention to what's going on in those minds in front of me. So that's part 1. Part 2, and this is a really important one, I think, and you've heard me go on about this at other points, so I'll keep it brief here, but I think we pay too much emphasis on content. And if we are trying desperately to squeeze 16 chapters, how do you have time to think about other things? I am not shackled to content. I'm not shackled to I have to cover all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. I would much rather my students get it and get less well than more superficially.
Right. And so what percentage of 16 chapters, of all the content in an Intro Psych textbook, what percentage would you estimate that you have students learning in your class?
So both, let's talk about, estimate versus, required to learn, right? So on paper, right, they do 11 chapters. Okay, I have a 14-week semester. They do 11 chapters. Mm-hmm. So there are some chapters that I give 3 class periods to, but most chapters get 2 class periods. Okay, so and I say on paper it's 11 chapters. Some semesters I may jettison material from some of the chapters if we've had a great discussion about something else. Okay, I didn't want to answer your estimate how much they've learned question because that varies a lot. I mean, you can if since I like empirical data, the stats say at least by the end of the semester, the average grades are about the 77 to 78 to 80%, right? So on a final cumulative exam, the average score is about 80%, right? Now, of course, work that Eric and I did shows that that number drops with years since IntroPsych,
right?
And that's a whole separate question.
Yeah, and the reason why my question came across a little awkward is because I'm trying not to use this word cover content because it drives Eric nuts.
Yeah.
And so, but yes, so you are on paper. You got about 11 chapters.
They are reading 11 chapters. We are talking about at least 11 distinct areas of psychology.
Yep. And you pick those. I imagine you pick those out of the recommendations for IntroPsych.
Yes.
So
strengthening the IntroPsych. 5 pillars, 2 from each. You know, and that's actually if you do the math, there you go. Foundation of research methods.
Yeah.
1.
Yeah.
2 topics from each of the 5 pillars. 10 plus 1, 11.
Good. Perfect. Yeah.
I walk the walk.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, you sure do. You better.
Yeah.
Okay. So. I think I have more questions about that. Let me think about this. Okay, so we might come back to content in a second, but actually, let's do it right now. Content and skills. You know what? It's bothered me recently that we say content versus skills, or I've heard this, content versus skill, and I just don't think it's an and for me, not a versus. But I don't know what it is for you, and how do you think about that in your IntroPsych class?
Well, I think it's the classic. When we think about skills, right? I mean, I have a pretty broad definition of skills, and I want them to be able to do stuff with the content that they're learning, right? And I think that whole sentence is important because it's not so much I want them to do stuff. I want them to do stuff with the content that they're learning, right? So one of my favorite examples is I don't do this every semester, but I do it pretty often, is I have that entire class, 250 students, do a 3-page paper, okay? And the assignment is pick a area of your life and use material from at least 3 distinct chapters to explain your behavior. So that's application, right? That's doing something, that's putting stuff together. Mm-hmm. A lot of the group work that I have them do is, again, doing stuff with it. It's synthesizing, it's evaluating, it's application. Yep. So I get them to do all that stuff with the content that they're learning.
Yeah, so you're double dipping all the time, skills
all
and
the
content.
time, all the time. You're right. It's not now we do this, now we do that. I also get at this by varying assessments. So, for example, I have my students do weekly quizzes on each chapter. And I will tell them the quizzes are getting more at those early levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And actually, I say this to them. I talk about Bloom's taxonomy. I say, hey, look, there are all these levels. I want to go beyond understanding and memorizing or remembering and, and understanding. I want to go all the way. But I'm going to have different assessments that do different things. So your weekly quizzes, that's going to be at the factual level, right? They're multiple choice. It's 250 people. They're multiple choice. And it's really getting at the remembering.
So this is you have pretty much 11 of these then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Every week they're
Yeah.
taking one,
Mm-hmm.
And here's where I also blend in cognitive psych. So I push for spaced practice. I push for repeat testing. I tell my students, look, I want you to take each quiz at least 3 times the first week that it's open, okay, for the repeat testing. And then I push in the spaced practice by having them do it along the semester. And I tell them, look, the quizzes, you can take them as many times as you want, and I'll give you your highest grade. So that's a pretty nice incentive there.
Yeah.
But that requirement of at least 3 times in the first week ensures that they're not taking all of them just before the exam.
Right. Now, and I'm going to guess those are low stakes.
Completely low stakes.
Yeah.
So my quizzes are 10% of my final grade.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not a
So break that down. What are the? You don't have to hit everything probably, but break down what makes up the final grade in your
right.
IntroPsych class.
So IntroPsych, 3 multiple choice exams, right? Totaling 60%. 10% for quizzes, 15% for group work, and on and off. And this varies. Some semesters I will assign 5% to attendance. And I rationalize that even in the face of some folks saying, oh, they're adults, they can choose whether they come or not. my rationalized, very explicit philosophy is, A, the research shows that taking attendance helps. But B, more importantly, I think a lot of the first-year students aren't socialized to college yet. So we may say, yeah, it's a good idea to attend. But some of them think, oh, you don't have to go to every class. And I think the way I see it, if I can get that behavior going with a simple 5% of the grade, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't do that all the time, but I definitely do it. And when I do it, I actually have my TAs pass a sheet around every class. And not only that, I have them actually count the number of people in chairs and tally it to the names on the sheet. So there was one time when there was one extra name, and I stopped class and I said, in this particular row, one of you have put a name of a friend. I'm going to send the sheet back. Here's your chance. Scratch the name out. It never happened again.
They did scratch it out.
Oh, they scratched it out. Yeah.
It.
And I spoke to the person and I said, so why did you put so and so's name? Oh, they were coming later.
Yeah, that's convenient. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's super helpful. So your multiple choice exams, obviously, at a class that size, you have to. And I'm not against. I don't think you should be against multiple choice testing. I think it can be done very well. But where have you? How have you got your multiple choice questions over the years?
Right. So I start with the test banks. And then I go through it and I throw out anything that I think is too logic-based or too nitty-gritty, too detail-oriented, and then I write a whole bunch.
Yep.
So, having taught it for 19, 20 years, almost every semester I'm writing new stuff. So my pool is growing larger and larger.
Right.
So because we have the same course management system, I have this big pool of IntroPsych exam questions that over the years have come from many different textbooks.
Good. What could we expect, or what could students expect on day one of your class? What are you doing on day one with your students?
Day one is very different. Day one, first off, they do not see the syllabus until 1 hour into class. I spend the entire first hour. I literally tell them, I said, before you get worried about grades and papers and things like that, here's your chance to see what psych's all about. And I just pull out the stops, talk about the sexiest things in psychology.
What are they? Give us a preview.
Oh, some relationships, right? Stress, examples about, and sometimes timely stuff like gun violence or, things like that. Really gripping issues from everyday life with a teaser of the psychological processes that explain it, right? So a number of things are happening that first day. So first off, I spend a good 10 minutes telling them about myself, right? Let them really know where I'm coming from and I tell them, look, we're all biased by our backgrounds. So you need to know what my academic and personal background is because it's going to shape the intro psych that I give you. Because the intro psych that I give you is going to be different from the Garth intro psych. Is going to be different from the, Dina or Eric or Susan, or Susie intro psych. But it's also rapport building. So there's a lot of time with that. And I mentioned earlier that I memorize names. So to do that, I have each of them write their names on a piece of paper, and then I take pictures. So I literally walk around and take groups of pictures, and this takes some time, and they're having some fun and things like that. So there's a little bit of that. Then there's what will we be covering in this course, and I use a developmental story. So my story is, look, we're going to start with the biology and the scientific method and research methods for how we get this information. Then we start with the biology, because literally think about being born, right? When you get that fertilization takes place, that cell is growing. So we start with biology. I say, then we're going to talk about how you grow. We're going to talk about human development and then how you learning and memory, and, and so on and so forth. So there's this thematic thing where I tell them the story of what the semester is going to be like, right? Then I also spend some time on what do we do as psychologists, right? And here's where I think it really changed some minds about what does that word psychologist mean. So when I say what do psychologists do, I give them, I do this abbreviated version of the Asch conformity study, all right? And what I do is I totally set it up. It's a class of 250, but while people are milling into class, I'm there early, and I walk up to a certain row, and and I have this little note that I've written where I create Confederates. Okay, so I literally create confederates for the Ash conformity study so that 45 minutes later, where we're doing the how do you be a scientist, I do the conformity study, and here are 5 people who are saying clearly the wrong line, right? And then the 6th person doesn't know what the heck's going on. And the good news is, whether they conform or don't conform, there's still a story to be told.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And I do what I like to call a set piece around the conformity study, because right there I say, so how do you think it would be different? And I actually have them generate hypotheses and then show them a video clip where we can test each of the hypotheses. So if they say, oh, if the Confederates were, if the participant was a different age, and then I show them a clip of a different age participant. Then they say, oh, if the participant was a different ethnicity, and then I show them a clip of what would happen. And I say, okay, great hypothesis. What do you predict? Here's what happens. And it's a little set piece. Mm-hmm. It's all told. The whole setup, walking through it, is 15 or 20 minutes, but they are totally in it. Because they don't have to write anything down. They're just playing along. And, but all of those things get me to that hour, the first hour, and then I take the last 15 minutes for the syllabus and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But by that time, they're already, man, this is going to rock. So
yeah, this is a theme, by the way, talking to people who teach intro psych. I think that good teachers are finding that hook, that first class. And it should be easy to do, right? So don't jump right into the syllabus.
Gosh, no.
Like, that is the most boring thing you can do
and
with the most
never
exciting
hand
material.
out the syllabus and end class.
Right.
That peeves me off to no end. Don't squander the day that they are primed and ready for action.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So I guess I just have a couple more questions. One would be, before I do this one, let me ask you, how are you doing a pre-test, post-test in your class these days to measure learning? I'm sure you've done that, or how are you collecting data? How do you think about SOTL in your class?
Right. So a lot of the I've done a couple of different things in intro psych. Most of them involve an end of semester assessment of various characteristics that may influence learning. Right. So which are then correlated with their exam scores. So for the most part, in my intro psych class, I tend to do more correlational kind of studies. What predicts their learning and the exam scores. Now, in this category, I've done amount of texting, attendance, a whole bunch of personality characteristics, how much they use quizzes, so on and so forth. The most time-intensive thing that I did in the intro class was I actually let students choose their own textbook. Okay? Now, to be fair, that sounds crazy. I gave them a choice of 2. So I went through all 40, picked 2. One was a magazine-y type of flashy format. One was a regular standard textbook. Both were supposedly close to the same difficulty level. And I worked with my bookstore. The bookstore set up a little booth where students could preview each of the books and then pick. And that semester, I actually wrote two sets of exams, where even though the bulk of the questions were the same, a small set of questions were written specifically to the book that the student had picked. My big deal was, does the textbook really make a difference? I'm constant. The context is constant. If the only thing that varies is the textbook, will we see differences in exam scores? And the answer is no. There were definitely differences in their ratings of the book, and students actually liked the less magazine-y book better. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they found there was more content there. But that's probably the most intensive manipulation, experimental kind of work that I've done in intro psych. Yeah,
really interesting. But one of the things I appreciate about you is that you're always thinking about assessment, and you're always thinking about how learning is taking place and what is affecting it. And so, and anybody can do that in their intro psych class. They just have to be creative, I think, right, in the questions that they're asking or how they're setting things up.
And I think, but it's also important to, and something I've done a lot recently is really pushing for multi-site studies. So if I'm the next time I do a study in my intro psych class, I will make sure to have a few other sections on other campuses be doing a similar study so we can do some comparisons.
Yep.
Because I think that's what we need in intro.
Yep.
That's one of the things we need in intro.
Last question is there anything that you are wanting to change right now in your class? Are you pretty happy with where it's at right now?
You know, given the work you and I are doing with the General Psych Initiative, I've been thinking a lot about intro, so much so that I am holding on teaching intro until I can sort things out.
Yeah.
Because there are so many questions about what's the best way to do it. I don't feel like I can go and do it the same old way until I've had some time to think about better ways and test them.
Yeah.
So it's somewhat ironic that for somebody who's written and does so much on intro psych that I'm actually taking a break from teaching intro psych, but I just can't go and do it the way I've always done it until I've had a chance to think about all this new stuff that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, that's good. Well, hey, thanks for doing this.
All right.
I appreciate it. I'm sure people are going to find it helpful. So,
all right, super.
Thanks.